Hello, I'm Jude Scott, and I'd love to share with you today how to paint clouds in Holbein Watercolour. I love a cloudy sky. I love to see white wispy clouds. I like big stormy dark clouds. I love all sorts of clouds. But when I first started painting, I didn't really know how to approach it. I had no idea of how to paint clouds, so I'd love to share with you what I've learned. I'm starting with some Cobalt. It's Holbein 290 Cobalt, and just dropping that into a damp sky. I have wet the top left-hand corner of the paper because all of my clouds I want soft edges. When I paint clouds, I like to have soft edges because they look organic and they look like they're part of the sky. To me, clouds with hard edges just don't work. So this is how I paint my clouds. Here I'm using a mix that's a lot darker, and the mix is based with Ultramarine and some Mars Violet. You can see the mixtures that I've got there in my palette, and it just produces a really lovely stormy patch of cloud to the sky. I've got quite a lot of water in with the pigment, so the pigment tends to float across the surface of the paper, and again it looks organic. It looks like a cloud that's part of a sky. And I really enjoy the process of painting clouds, so that you can just let the pigment mix with damp paper and create whatever sort of look of clouds you want. If you really love clouds, spend some time looking at what appeals to you most, the type of clouds that you really like. It's well worthwhile. Now here I'd love to get those clouds to look like they're raining on the landscape. So all you have to do is get a damp brush, put quite a bit of water in, make sure that your cloud mix is quite strong, and drag that cloud mix down to the horizon. You can see now how wet that paint is. It's wet enough to be able to drag down to the horizon, but not so wet that it dilutes the paint too much. Here I like to maybe accentuate some of the lightness in this fluffy cloud. So with a just damp brush, I can lift pigment off the paper. Holbein paints are amazing how well they'll lift back to almost white paper if you need to exaggerate some white spaces in your clouds. They work really well. So you can often see a little white cloud will sort of be in front of a darker cloud, and if you've got a good brush, one that's kind of stiff but not too stiff, you can lift that pigment off. You can see how wet the paper is, so you can get those clouds to just look like rain coming down your paper, and you can just lift off any excess moisture with the tip of a natural bristle brush like the one that I'm using. Now leave it to dry. That is really the hardest thing. Now I'm going to put some far distant hills on the horizon, and I'm just using a bit of Cobalt Blue and some Cobalt Turquoise mixed up. The next area, the hills, will be just a little bit warmer, so I've dropped in some quinacridone red, and it's just a little make-believe landscape, something that you can want to paint that you've got clouds over the landscape. So the colour that I'm using here is the same purple that I did the purple hill with, and I've mixed into that mixture just some yellow ochre, just to get a really nice earth colour happening back there. Now I'm just adding some burnt sienna because I want to warm that landscape up as it comes closer to the foreground. I'm quite happy how the clouds are looking at the moment. I think that's worked quite well. We've got the very soft clouds in the upper part of the painting, and the lower cloud, the dark one, does look like rain on the far distant horizon. So here's a close-up view of the far distant hills, and you can always add a little bit of vegetation just to make it more interesting. Just with the tip of your brush, I'm just using burnt sienna here and some ultramarine, which is my favourite go-to dark. Pop just some shadows in just under that vegetation. Because it's quite damp, that will fade as it dries. The trick here is not to make everything repetitive. The human eye loves repetition and it loves patterns, so make sure you've not got evenly sized, evenly spaced trees in your background. So now I'm using a really scruffy brush to do some vegetation in the foreground. Maybe a thick patch of vegetation with a couple of old dead sticks poking out of the top. And you can always take out some light areas. If you've got quite thick paint that is damp and you've got some fingernails, you can always scratch out some light areas. It works much better than white paint. It works better than masking fluid, because often you don't end up with putting your white areas where you thought originally. You can also use your nail just to drag down some vegetation that is not dead level with the other vegetation that you've got. And you can see how that variation of tone, light and dark, makes that so much more interesting. Now here I've got my rigger brush, which does fabulous fine lines, and it's great for doing all sorts of just razzle-dazzle type marks. I hold that quite close to the end and just sort of, I call it dancing with the brush. So you have random marks, you're not trying to sort of draw with it, you're just scumbling your brush just in lazy brush strokes over the paper. So it's really important to vary the tones that you have within your shrubbery and also the temperature. So if you've got some cool marks there, put some warm marks in as well. It'll be far more effective than if it's just one tone and just one temperature. All I need to do now to finish off this little sketch is just to put some shadows under that shrubbery and maybe cast a long shadow over the foreground, just to sort of seat the painting and give it a better sense of perspective. So there we are. We have the finished, very soft, watery looking clouds in the sky with rain coming down in the far distance. And that's over a landscape that's got far distant hills, middle distance, and a very warm foreground with some shrubs with twigs and sticks in. And I hope that's helped you maybe with a few directions to go with your clouds in part 1 of How to Paint Clouds in Holbein Watercolour. Thanks very much for watching.